Xinjiang in the 1930s and 40s was probably 70 to 80% Uyghur. There were Han people there, there have been Han people there for a very long time, but from 1949 onwards the positions changed quite dramatically. Partly it was as a result of people who'd been left behind as part of the Chinese Communist armies that took control in 1949. Partly it's been migration since, but the current position is that of approximately 16 million people living in Xinjiang, something like 8 million are Uyghurs. So it's roughly half and half. There's a certain difficulty about these figures because they are politically sensitive. And in a way, that 50-50 figure gives a rather misleading impression of Xinjiang. Because if you go to the capital, Urumqi, you find it to be a predominantly Han city, although there are areas in it which are completely Uyghur. And the same is true of other areas in northern Xinjiang. If you go to southern Xinjiang, for example, Kashgar, Yarkand, Hutan, the cities at the south of the Taklamakan Desert, these areas are almost entirely Uyghur. There are Han people there are Han government officials, but they are predominantly Uyghur areas. So the idea that it's half and half is true, but it doesn't work for the whole of the region. There's been a deliberate migration policy. In the 1950s, it was largely to do with the military. Having taken control of Xinjiang, the People's Liberation Army needed to garrison it. So the People's Liberation Army was predominantly Han, so they took control of the region and they settled. People settled. They had their families there. They had children there. During the 1950s and 1960s, particularly in the period towards the end of the Cultural Revolution, there was an attempt to resettle Red Guards in the countryside, partly to break up the Red Guard movement that had been developed in the Cultural Revolution, partly the idea that the borderlands needed resettling, and a lot of Red Guards, former Red Guards, were sent from eastern China, China proper, into the western regions, including Xinjiang. The more problematic part of migration is that Xinjiang, like Qinghai and other areas, has a great many prisons and prison camps. And so a lot of people convicted of serious crimes in eastern China have been sent to prison camps in Xinjiang, and when their term of imprisonment has come to an end, they've settled in that area, and there's a great deal of resentment at the fact that Xinjiang is seen as a dumping ground for prisoners and criminals from the rest of China. The position in the more recent past is that although there's been an encouragement of migration by the state, there's also been migration because of the economic opportunities that are perceived in Xinjiang. So if you travel to Xinjiang, for example, if you go on the train that goes directly from Shanghai to Urumqi, you'll find a lot of people who are going, Han people who are going from Shanghai out to Xinjiang to do business. Some of them are settling, others only spend a short time there and go back. So there's planned resettlement and there's economic migration. Urumqi is a predominantly Han town, and a lot of the officials and a lot of the businesses in Urumqi are run by Han Chinese. There are distinctive Uyghur quarters like Ardao Chao, where you have an Uyghur bazaar. There isn't any obvious day-to-day tension most of the time between Han and Uyghur. On the whole, the Uyghurs tend to, in Urumqi that is, tend to accept that is the state of play. On a personal level, you can meet Han people who have high-level Uyghur language skills, who get on very well with Uyghurs. But if you look at it on the general level, the Han are in charge. It's rather different in the more far-flung regions such as Kashgar in the southwest and Wulja, Yining as the Chinese call it, in the northwest. There you can detect a great deal of tension between the Han and the Uyghurs. The Han are really thought of and treated as colonists. They don't fit into local society, and in fact you can often see a dual economy, one economy run by the Uyghurs and one run by the Han Chinese. The government structure is quite interesting, because it's formally regarded as an Uyghur autonomous region. They have to have Uyghurs in the government. So, for example, the governor of Xinjiang is an Uyghur, but the party's secretary is a Han, Chinese, Wang Lechan. And nobody is under any illusions. The party has the upper hand, and it's Wang Lechan who runs Xinjiang, although formally there is an Uyghur provincial governor. I think on certain key issues like marriage, there tends to be a very clear division between the communities. There's an enormous pressure on Uyghurs to marry within the community. There are logical reasons for this. The language. Most Uyghurs speak Uyghur as their first language, and if they know Chinese well at all, they've learnt it at school. Most Han Chinese in Xinjiang, as far as I can tell, don't have very high-level Uyghur language. The basic beliefs and practices are the same, that Uyghur religious life centres on the mosque primarily, although a lot of people seem to have a greater attachment to the mazars, the tombs of Sufi sheikhs, the saints of the Sufi orders. Praying, the rules about praying are the same as they would be in, say, Pakistan or in Central Asia. The prohibitions on food are the same as in Islam worldwide. So it looks very similar to Central Asian or Pakistani Islam. The mosques mostly look like mosques that you would find in Uzbekistan or Pakistan. It is usually considered that Islam in Xinjiang is rather easier than Islam in a lot of other parts of the world. It's got a lighter touch, and this is put down to the nomadic Central Asian tradition. It's certainly an important part of people's lives. It's the central part of people's lives, the ability to go to the mosque. And although it's been discouraged over the last 30 or 40 years, it's quite clear that Islamic law plays a great deal of plays a great part in people's lives, and marriages and other social arrangements are often done in consultation with the Qadi, the Islamic jurists. Han people really do not understand a great deal about Islam in China. And you have to remember that there are Muslims in pretty well every part of China, in Beijing, small towns around eastern China. So they probably will be in contact with Muslims at some point in their lives. They don't really have any great understanding of it. Their images of Islam are, on the whole, fairly negative. It's seen as a strange and alien religion, and it seems un-Chinese to them. Has this changed since 2001, the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon? Probably not a great deal, although there's been a lot of publication since then with fairly anti-Islamic, with a fairly anti-Islamic slant to it. Islam has been associated in China with terrorism, as indeed it has been in the West, and so in many ways I think what you can say is it's reinforced the negative view of Islam that Han Chinese have. The state attempts to control all religions in China through local religious affairs bureaus, which are effectively the local branches of a specialist department of the government. The way it controls things is that all mosques and other Islamic organisations have to be registered, and that's the same also for Buddhist, Christian, any other religious organisations. So organisations that are registered with the state, where the imams and other officials are registered, are allowed to function. They probably are allowed to function with very, very little interference. In addition, there are from time to time patriotic education campaigns where imams from the registered mosques and indeed some of the other religious organisations are called in and are briefed by the state on what they're supposed to do and what they are supposed to think. So within that framework, the religious organisations are able to function. What there is, though, in addition to that, is underground, unofficial religious organisations. This applies equally to Buddhist, Christian, as well as it does to Islamic. But it's particularly the case with Sufi organisations, which are very important in Xinjiang. Some of them have not been registered, and some of them are accused of having been associated with independence or separatist activities. And in these cases, because they're not registered, the state considers them to be illegal outlaw organisations, and they're clamped down on fairly regularly. The state also likes to control the import of copies of the Quran and any other religious tracts, for example, sermons, and indeed DVDs or tapes of sermons are also controlled. They're happy in a way for Islam to operate in China, in a Chinese context, under the control of the state, but they are not very comfortable with Islamic materials or Islamic ideas coming from outside China. One of the most recent concerns in Xinjiang has been the question of the migration of young women between the ages of, say, 16 and 25 from the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region to other parts of China. This is particularly a concern about Uyghur women who are moving to other parts of China to work. The general context is that there's a mass migration of people around China. It's been estimated that there may be as many as 120 million people moving around China in search of work at any given time. It's an enormous number. It's approximately the population of Japan. So the idea of migrating isn't a particularly controversial one. These young women, like many other young women who move from other parts of China, tend to end up in very poor jobs, low wages, sweatshop conditions, often poor on health and safety. The Chinese government view this as just part of the general migration. Uyghurs in Xinjiang don't. They feel that this is a particular problem, that young Muslim women are being sent, because there's clearly an element of coercion in this. They're being sent to non-Muslim areas of China, and they're worried about the effect this will have on their lives, their morals, and their religion. I think the Chinese authorities have been pretty insensitive to the ethnic issue and take the view that there's no reason why Uyghur women should be treated in any different way to, for example, Han women from Guizhou province, which is a poor province which sends labour to other parts of China. Clearly, what people in Xinjiang are afraid of is that these women will move away from what is essentially an Islamic environment into a more secular one, and that in the same way that migration into Xinjiang is diluting the Islamic Uyghur nature of Xinjiang, that the migration of young Muslim women out of Xinjiang will contribute to the same effect.